radical Islamist regimes, I think, threatens us in many other ways as well. And you can't ignore it, and you can't talk, as the president did yesterday, about peace in our time, a phrase from Neville Chamberlain, for goodness sake. Amazing how that phrase got in his inaugural address, and ignore what's going on in the real world.
Well, you make a fascinating point with that when you look back to the time when Neville Chamberlain said that and what was to come in the world following those comments, and you and many others who are like-minded really feel that the scourge of al-Qaeda is growing, in fact, in this area. I was so struck, the cover of the New York Times the other day, I think it was Saturday morning maybe, after Leon Panetta made these comments and after we started to learn about the deaths in Algeria, had a front page story about how maybe the Arab Spring wasn't what it appeared to be originally. And I know you were, screaming that from the rafters back, back when the president of Egypt was falling. I mean, how off base is this administration, in your opinion, and how dangerous is that potentially?
Well, I think it's off base, and it's very dangerous. You don't have to be in London, as I am now, to think about Neville Chamberlain when you hear that phrase, peace in our time. And British Prime Minister David Cameron, who has hardly been a hawk on these matters, has said here in the past few days that we may be looking at decades of struggle against al-Qaeda, and I think he's right. I think the global war on terrorism has not gone away. We can ignore it in the United States when there aren't manifestations of it, but we have been at war with al-Qaeda in Afghanistan, and it's now happening in North Africa. So we can either follow the peace in our time approach, or we can get serious about this threat before it strikes in the American homeland again.
Well, it certainly has hit home for the families of these 3 Americans killed in Algeria. They know that there is clearly a war that is still going on. Ambassador Bolton, thank you very much. We'll see you soon. So as I mentioned, 3 Americans died in the terror attack. 7 others survived.
We're standing at the edge of the abyss in the Middle East. We are seeing riots all over. You mentioned earlier in the show the takeover of the embassy in Libya in 1979. Obviously, our diplomats were taken hostage in Iran in 1979. Our embassy in Islamabad, Pakistan, was attacked in 1979. A wave of events that really catapulted us into a new and very dangerous period in the region. We're right at that point again. And the issue for the United States is not who issued what statement at what time. The issue is, do we have an effective policy in place to protect American interests around the region? And the answer as of right now is no, we don't, because we've got an administration that doesn't understand what's happening in the Middle East, isn't prepared to take strong steps to advance American interest, and isn't protecting America's friends, not just Israel, but our Arab friends as well.
What is the proper response on behalf of the U.S. government? What should President Obama do?
The first thing he should say unequivocally and publicly to the governments of Libya and Egypt is that you failed miserably in your primary obligation to protect the diplomats and facilities of the United States. And he should say privately, if it happens again, we're cutting off all assistance. That message has to go across the Middle East. Second, he's got to demonstrate that we don't accept that American interests are going to be attacked on pretext that we do have a war on terrorism we need to fight against al-Qaeda in Libya, against terrorists like the outcroppings of the Muslim Brotherhood in Egypt and around the region. We're not hearing that from the administration because it's not their policy.
There's been a lot made about a Romney statement, a U.S. Embassy statement that came out of Cairo based on the timing, etc. And this, you can flip the news channels all over the place and you can find this. This is what we understand was released by the U.S. Embassy in Cairo in a statement that Governor Romney later reacted to. We condemn the continuing efforts by misguided individuals to hurt the religious feelings of Muslims. We firmly reject the actions by those who abuse the universal right of free speech to hurt the religious belief of others. In response to that, this is what Governor Romney issued. Quote, "It's disgraceful that the Obama administration's first response was not to condemn attacks on our diplomatic missions, but to sympathize with those who waged the attacks." weigh in on that.
Look, he is absolutely right. That comment by the embassy, whoever it was in the embassy who issued it, is the sort of thing that Gene Kirkpatrick once called the blame America first syndrome. And it is a signal of weakness around the region that, faced with mobs in the street, faced with, I think, the potential culpability of the government of Egypt not to have adequate security forces around the perimeter of our embassy, that we're apologizing for some unknown person in some obscure film. That signal of weakness inspires our adversaries to threaten us more, and it tells Iran in particular that this administration can't deal with threats to American interests.
One more point in the 15 seconds I have left, and this is a big point. 12 years ago, October 12, 2000, the USS Cole was attacked in Yemen. That was 3 weeks before a national election, and we sit now some 50-plus days from another national election. It was largely misunderstood, that attack then, and it's seen in a much different light today. Do we properly understand what has happened now in the attack against Americans overseas?
I don't think the administration does. I think that the sanctions that have been imposed to date have had no effect on it. And I want to underline that that's the view of the Obama administration's Director of National Intelligence, who testified about 10 days ago to that effect to the Senate. You know, we hear a lot of propaganda, really, by the proponents of sanctions that they're having an effect on Iran and so on and so forth. But the Director of National Intelligence testified that all of the sanctions to date had not changed Iran's policies or behavior on its nuclear weapons program. Look, Iran has been the world's central banker of terrorism for decades. They've been listed on our list of state sponsors of terrorism for a long time. The Justice Department just got an indictment against top Iranian Revolutionary Guards officials for conspiring to kill the Saudi Arabian ambassador to the United States on the streets of Washington. So I think the Israeli diplomats are vulnerable, and it shows just how barbaric the mullah's regime in Tehran is. And if you don't like any of that activity, just imagine how much worse it gets once they get a nuclear weapon. As the Director of National Intelligence said, Obama's own appointee, nothing that has been done so far has affected the nuclear weapons program. As a general proposition, sanctions are only effective if they're truly comprehensive and rigorously enforced. And on the oil question specifically, India has said it will continue to import Iranian oil. China has. Turkey has. But are the sanctions going to bring them to their knees on the nuclear program? No way. And I think it's delusional. It objectively benefits the Iranian nuclear program if you truly think sanctions are going to work here, because it lulls us into a very false sense of security. The Obama administration fears an Iranian nuclear weapon less than they fear an Israeli strike. I think that's misguided. I think the U.S. position ought to be to support Israel. And I think we're in a very dangerous period here for Israel. Honestly, they should have struck about 4 years ago, because the program now in Iran is so extensive that they may attack and yet not really break Iran's control over the nuclear fuel cycle, which is a very unfortunate circumstance. We're running out of time. Israel's running out of time. Nobody can calibrate exactly when Iran will get the bomb, and you don't want to miss by even 1 day, because then the Iranian retaliation itself could be nuclear.